What is up, enthusiasts? It is Cedar Flags here, and welcome back to another one of my videos. So when it comes to Cedar Point in Sandusky, Ohio, the 2024 season has officially come to a close. Now, Cedar Point is a park that I have gotten to go to a lot and get a good feel for all of the major coasters there. I also got to go there a few times this year as well, and today I wanted to talk about the 2024 season, more specifically, the top 10 roller coasters at Cedar Point for this year. Now, these are my rankings for, like I said, the 2024 season, and I will be sure to make one next year when Siren's Curse opens, but as of right now, we have a nice list. In this video, I'm going to rank the 10 coasters at the park with a few honorable mentions. And yes, I will be including Top Thrill 2 on this list, since I got to ride it on its opening day. So let's get right into it. This is Cedar Flags, and today, I'm going to count down the top 10 roller coasters at Cedar Point in 2024. So, like I said, we're going to go over a few honorable mentions first. The first one I want to talk about is Wild Mouse, the new for 2023 coaster. This is a Zamperla Freeform, which is a type of their Wild Mouse. This is an extended layout of their Wild Mouse. And honestly, this has to be one of my favorite family spinning coasters. It's long, it has a nice spinning layout, and the trains are extremely comfy as well. The ride is pretty fast-paced for a family ride, and as you go throughout the layout, you have nothing but the greatest amount of fun. This ride also has a lot of great charm. You have a cat at the top of the lift hill, and you have sound effects playing throughout the ride. For the next honorable mention, we have Rugaru. This is Cedar Point's B&M floorless coaster that opened up as Mantis back in the 90s. So I got to ride this as Mantis in its closing year, and I have to say, I was more of a fan of Mantis, but I still love Rugaru. But that might be because I love stand-up coasters so much. It's definitely not the smoothest of B&Ms, but really isn't the worst either if you get a really good ride. And finally, for the honorable mentions, we have Cedar Creek Mine Ride. It's going to be pretty clear in this top 10 that I am a big fan of arrows, so let's start off with a smaller one. This is the second oldest operating coaster at the park, and it is a classic Arrow mine train. Nothing too intense, but the turns in the hills and the scenery around it make this a very worthwhile coaster. Alright, let's get right into this top 10. Starting off at the number 10 spot, we have Raptor, the park's B&M inverted coaster. Opening up back in 1994, this opened up with a bunch of records, but even though they have since been replaced by bigger ones, this ride still stands on its own on being a great inverted coaster. It probably has one of my favorite layouts of any B&M invert, because of its star elements. The first one I want to talk about is that vertical loop. Now, this is right after the first drop, and this is still one of my favorite B&M loops. It's extremely forceful, and the views of the rest of the park look incredible. Of course, that zero-G roll is great, and I'm a big fan of that Cobra roll, but the second half is where it really gets fast. If you get a trimless ride, you will meander throughout the ride and then go into two intense corkscrews and a very interesting helix, where you'll definitely feel the intensity. This ride is very well rounded for a B&M invert. It's got some great inversions, and together, this is a very nice ride that I try not to miss when I have a full day up at Cedar Point. Going to its next door neighbor, we have the number 9 spot, which is Blue Streak. Blue Streak is probably one of my favorite PTC wooden coasters. It opened up back in 1964, and even though it's not the biggest, it still has a very nice layout, and one that's very family friendly, but thrilling at the same time, especially if you sit near the front. In some rows, this ride isn't the smoothest coaster, but if you sit near the front, this ride will be a-okay. This first drop isn't really too much, but the airtime hills that follow are going to deliver a crazy, classic airtime experience. It feels like good old PTC. The ride is extremely fast-paced, especially for its age, and even though it's over quickly, all of the airtime moments that this ride provides throughout its experience definitely make for a great ride experience, and honestly, if this was at a smaller park, I'm sure this would be one of the highlight attractions. Alright, let's go back to B&M with our number 8 spot. We have Val Raven. This opened up as the tallest and fastest dive coaster on Earth, and while it doesn't hold any of its records anymore, it still delivers a ride experience that is unlike any other at Cedar Point, hanging over that drop, dropping over 200 feet, and then going through some great elements. But, along with that drop, this ride has some other incredible elements as well, and while people like to say that these rides only have one trick up their sleeve, I would honestly beg to differ. This ride has multiple great inversions, including that final one, which is very unique, including that final 0G roll, which definitely catches everyone off guard, and of course, you can't forget that second drop off the mid-course, which, if you're sitting in the back, is going to give some great ejector airtime. This ride, even though it has the vests, still delivers some good airtime in my opinion. The positive forces are good on this one, and I can't wait to ride Val Raven even more in years to come. For the number 7 spot, we go to Magnum XL200, which is the park's aero hyper, and when I talk about good arrows, this is definitely a great example. This ride has so much airtime, but also has that old school aero feel, and when you combine them, you get a great experience that is unlike many coasters today. When this opened up in 1989, it was the first hypercoaster, which meant it was the first full circuit coaster to go over 200 feet. And with both the intense ride experience and that aero feel, you are guaranteed to get a great prototype hyper. Some of my highlights of the ride are, first off, that drop. Now, the drop isn't one of my favorites, but that view of the lake is insane. And then you have that airtime moment right before the turnaround, which actually might be my favorite moment of the ride. It is very intense, it's sustained, and you are out of your seat that entire hill. But the ride doesn't end there. After the turnaround, you go into a series of ejector airtime moments, and once you're at the section that's parallel with Magnum's lift, you are getting some crazy ejector airtime. Another thing I want to talk about this ride is its theming. While it isn't as heavily themed as other rides at other parks, the ride's station and tunnel definitely add to the charm of the park. And the music that they play, the architecture of the station, and that overall late 80s feel definitely adds to the Magnum experience. Now, a lot of people would say that Magnum XL200 is their favorite aero at Cedar Point, and while I could definitely see it, I would say I would slightly put the number 6 spot Gemini a little over Magnum. Now, these rides are neck and neck, and some of the best coasters that Aero has constructed in its entire lifetime. As long as I sit near the back, I get some of the craziest, most intense airtime I have ever felt on an Aero coaster, and it makes me pretty confident to put this ride up this high. If you sit in the very back row on that first drop, you will get some of the most intense airtime you will ever experience. My stomach drops every single time I go on that first drop. And as you slam back into your seat, you go into a turnaround, a few more airtime moments in another turnaround, and then you get into the second star moment of the ride. This is the double down, and like I said, if you're sitting in the back, which is by far the best row on this ride, you will get all of this insane ejector. So, this double down, you get airtime on the first dip, very banked airtime as it comes out of a little turn, and then you will get some sustained floater with a pop of ejector at the end. Now, in other rows, I would probably rank this ride lower, but sitting in the back row specifically, this ride is absolutely crazy, and one of the most intense ride experiences you can get at Cedar Point. Moving on from Aero, we are going to be talking about number 5, which is GateKeeper, Cedar Point's wing coaster, and it is one of my favorite looping B&Ms I've ever been on. Might be even my favorite. In my opinion, this ride has some of the most perfect elements for a B&M looper, and one of the most well-rounded B&M looper layouts. This ride also captures the eyes of almost any enthusiast walking in, seeing the track go over the keyholes, as well as that amazing wing over drop. This ride definitely stands its place in the Cedar Point skyline. And as it welcomes you to this park, I say you check out this ride because the key elements on this ride definitely deliver. The first drop is super intense, and the positive G's, especially at the bottom, and that element after that you go into this nice camelback, where if you're sitting in the back, you will get some good floater. Then you go into a massive corkscrew, a great element, but then you go into what is probably the most photogenic part of the ride, the keyholes. These are near miss elements that definitely provide some great head and leg chopper moments, and it definitely looks disorienting, especially on your first few rides. Between those, you also have a nice junior dive loop, and you end off the ride with a nice airtime hill and a helix. This ride, I've gotten to ride the 4 big B&M wings in America, and I definitely think this is my favorite. It just has the most well-rounded layout, and the most intense elements from what I've personally experienced. Alright, we're going to the number 4 spot, which is a very interesting spot because this is a ride that really hasn't been open much this year at all. Yes, we are talking about Top Thrill 2. This ride was only open for about a week in the public season, and fortunately I got to get one ride on it on its opening day in the back car. I remember waiting in that line opening day and riding it, feeling very optimistic for this ride's future, and unfortunately about a week later, like I said, this ride would shut down for the rest of the season due to many operational problems. Now the park has advertised that they will bring this ride back, and I am very much hoping so, because I want more enthusiasts to experience the new and revitalized Top Thrill 2. Now, Dragster had a very big place in my heart, and I still definitely prefer that over Top Thrill 2, and that was simply because of that 0 to 120 launch, which honestly might have been my favorite element on any coaster ever. But with Top Thrill 2, you get a nice replacement that is still extremely thrilling, and my number 4 coaster at Cedar Point. Now, like I said, the launch was the highlight on the previous ride, but what does Top Thrill 2 still deliver? Well, we have that backward spike, which is one of the weirdest but greatest moments on any coaster I've ever been on, from nearly 400 feet off the ground. Of course, you have the top hat preserved, and that top hat was always one of my favorite moments on any coaster as well. These two elements make up a great ride. Now, the reason I like the top hat so much is because, of course, the airtime and the insane sensation of speed. Alright, now we're getting into the top 3. These are 3 coasters I love, and these 3 coasters very confidently make up my top 15 overall coasters. The number 3 spot goes to Maverick, Cedar Point's Intamin Blitz coaster, opening up back in 2007. When Maverick came out, it was the first Intamin Blitz coaster, and it was a very interesting model at the time. But this ride that would feature fast-paced elements and multiple launches popularized the genre of the coaster. The first main element I want to talk about is the first thrilling one of the ride, that first drop. Especially if you're sitting near the back. If you can't tell, I'm a back row rider. This back row drop is just insane. You fly out of your seat right into that shoulder harness, and you slam back into your seat on the way down. And talking about sheer intensity, this is probably one of the most intense airtime moments I have experienced. But the party is not over, as you get some great turns low to the ground with some great positive Gs, and some more S-tier airtime hills, especially that one before the horseshoe roll and the one before the final brake run. And that second launch is in a tunnel, so the added theming really adds to the experience. You launch out around 70 miles an hour and go into that second half, which includes that aforementioned airtime moment and 2 incredible stangle dives that provide some incredible whip and some very positive ride experiences. For the number 2 spot, we go to another Intamin coaster. This is Millennium Force. I know a lot of people do prefer Maverick and other rides I've mentioned over Millennium, but Millennium is just one of my favorite coasters for a few reasons. First off, you have that 300-foot drop, where if you are sitting, you guessed it, in the back, you will get some crazy intense airtime, and at the bottom, you will get some crazy positive Gs. And honestly, that first drop with that overbank turn is probably one of the most intense positive G moments I've experienced on a coaster if you go on the right day. You go into that tunnel into a very massive camelback and get some great floater airtime. Along this entire ride, you get some great views of the park. Surrounded by roller coasters, you go up 2 massive overbank turns that provide some great positive Gs and whip, and once again, another airtime moment. This one being a little more intense to the one parallel to it. The finale of the ride includes a nice sharp airtime moment, followed by a straight track with another overbank turn. Though the ride doesn't provide as much variety as some of the rides I mentioned before, every single element on this ride, especially if the ride is running great, provides some very intense and just enjoyable airtime. Alright, so now we get into the number 1 spot, and it is, of course, Steel Vengeance, the RMC Hyper Hybrid that was converted from the old Mean Street coaster. This opened up back in 2018 to absolute rave reviews. If you like airtime, Steel Vengeance is the coaster for you, as it provides some incredible airtime moments, and a lot of them. This ride has the duration, and it has the airtime throughout that entire duration. This isn't just my favorite coaster at Cedar Point, this is my favorite coaster of all time. The ride has so many different airtime moments, and almost 30 seconds of airtime, and of course the ride's length, where it goes over 5,000 feet in track, which is the longest of the RMCs as of right now. This ride also kind of has its own area in the back of the park, but of course, as we all know, the party starts after that drop, and that first drop is crazy. any row, you will be flying out of your seat right into that lap bar, and once you go down in that drop, you are once again just beginning. You get a very nice airtime hump, followed by some of my favorite airtime moments on the ride include that top hat right after the first drop. This element is just nothing but sustained ejector, and it rides just as good as it looks. You go into a double up into the first inversion, which is one of my favorite inversions on any coaster, as it provides both whip and hang time, along with a very fast-paced experience. Including what they call a flying snake dive. It's kind of like a cutback, it's also kind of like a stall, but it's very unique, and it belongs on a ride like this. There's a double down, and then a double up into the mid-course. After that mid-course, you go into a double up, an off-axis airtime hill, which provides some great whip and ejector as you go into that structure. Within the structure, you'll get some airtime too, especially with that wave turn, which is some great sideways airtime, before you go into the ride's finale, which are back-to-back-to-back airtime moments that will have you launching in and out of your seat up until the ride's final brake run. This ride, in my opinion, is the best coaster at Cedar Point and my favorite coaster ever. Now, will anything ever beat it? I could very much see it happen in the future, but as of right now, this still holds the title. So, let me know what your top 10 at Cedar Point is in the comments below, and of course, let me know if you've been to Cedar Point, the experiences you've had, and what is your favorite coaster at the park. Until next time, this is Cedar Flags, and I will see you all later.